Welcome to the Self-Help Coaching Podcast, where insights, attitudes, and methods for success get illuminated. Learn what leaders and change workers have done and are doing now to create magnificent futures. We interview great guests who inspire you to overcome obstacles and achieve your goals. Be sure you visit our website at self-helpcoaching.com. While you're there, subscribe to us via your favorite network. Now, just relax as you listen. You can do something else, but be ready to make an important note. And let's get started.
The title of this interview is The Online Coaching Industry, and my guest is Michael Ceely. We'll be talking about how the online coaching industry is booming, and there is a demand for hyper niche skills and knowledge. We'll also be getting into mental health, anxiety management for business owners, and psychotherapy and coaching in general. So let me tell you a little bit about Michael. He is a licensed psychotherapist with online practices in Florida, Wisconsin, and California. He is the founder of Men's Therapy Directory, a website dedicated to men's mental health. Michael is also a former competitive cyclist. Got that right. During his cycling career, he won 2 state titles and twice went to the Olympic trials. So this guy knows how to pedal. In addition to his counseling practice, Michael provides elite mindset coaching to athletes, and we'll be getting into all of that stuff. Welcome, Michael. A pleasure to meet you.
Hey, Tony. Thanks for having me on your show.
Not at all. I love how, and it's going to be my first question, how you're both a coach and a psychotherapist. And just at the outset, psychology is my favorite subject. Why do we do what we do or not do what we don't? It's just fascinating. I can talk about it infinitely. But when I first got into personal development 30 years ago, psychology obviously is a big part of that. Since that time, every now and then I'm like, okay, I'm going to go to school and become a psychologist, and maybe a therapist, a counselor, whatever, get a degree. But of course, that takes a lot of work and time, and I always procrastinated on it. And then finally, about 5 years ago, I started working on Petrozza, which is this virtual coaching program, which is going to transform self-help and personal development. So I said, so that thought came up. Okay, do I want to become a psychologist? I say, I have to come to a conclusion with this reoccurring thought. I was like, okay, no, I'm going to be an entrepreneur, stay an entrepreneur, because I really believe my program, Petrozza, is going to be a psychological boom. It could help so many people. And I'm putting this thought to rest. Even though I have such great respect for the field of psychology, I will not be becoming a psychologist. Even though I like what Tony Robbins says, and it's true, that coaches by activity are practical psychologists. Well, of course, we didn't go to school like Michael did. Now, let me ask you, Michael, describe the marriage between psychotherapy, of course, you're a psychotherapist, and coaching.
That's an interesting way to put it, the marriage between them.
Marriage or discernment, whichever.
Yeah, well, it makes me think about, in a marriage where there's partners and they're each their own separate person, but they have a lot of things in common. They like to hang around together. So yeah, that's a great.
That was the best way I've ever heard it put. Well done, sir.
Yeah. So that's the trick, right? So what's the difference? When does somebody need psychotherapy and when do they need coaching? I'll give you an example. So in my practice, I work with a lot of athletes, and we're talking about like hyper niche, right? So I've found just over the years from my background in bicycle racing that a lot of athletes they check out my website and they want to work with me and they have like an athletic background. So I'll get like some really serious athletes, some weekend warriors, etc. And they'll say, hey, I really want to, I've been in a slump. I'm feeling down. It's really affecting my athletic performance. At that point, I want to know whether psychotherapy is best for them or they're doing basically okay and they are just a little bit of a slump and they want to improve their athletic performance. I think that's really important to discern like what they need in that moment.
So in layman's terms, if you think they have a deeper issue, perhaps you might say psychotherapy is the way to go.
Yeah. Yeah. Like for sure, right off the bat, like if there's any substance abuse problems, that have a problem with that, I'm not going to do coaching with them because they need to take care of that first. So I may even refer them, like on the initial phone call with them and talking on the phone the first time. I like, hey, I know this great guy in San Francisco because I've lived there for quite a while, for calling me from California or whatever. I'll say, hey, I know this great guy. He's a substance abuse counselor. You'll help you get clean and sober. So if they have a problem with drugs or alcohol, I'm not going to work with them, period. Not even with psychotherapy. I want to get that taken care of first. So I think it's really important to kind of vet the client of what's the best service for them. And it might not be your service, right? It could be maybe you have an athlete saying, hey, my performance is really, really off. And they'll ask, kind of do a quick assessment of what's going on in all domains of their life. They say, hey, any relational conflicts going on right now? And they go, yeah, well, I'm going through a divorce. Like, well, that might affect your athletic performance. I think we need to work on that issue. Here's a couples counselor I can refer you to. Or if you just want to talk with me, we'll work through some of that stuff first before you can even think about improving your athletic game. Because I know that if you're stressed out about your divorce, you're not going to be on your game no matter what, right? So that's the difference between coaching and psychotherapy is asking enough questions from the get-go to know if that client is right for coaching, if you're a coach, if they're right for psychotherapy and you're a psychotherapist, or if you need to refer out to a specialist and do that client the best service that you can. So.
Well, that's an excellent answer. Thank you. And let me compliment the part about addiction. I'm as I said, committed to personal development. I was a life coach, and now I'm the head of a technological coaching company. I'm a certified coach, certified NLP practitioner, and I love philosophy. I embrace philosophies, psychology, as I mentioned, all this stuff. The most, and I'm committed to personal excellence. The most profound, that all said, the most profound thing I ever did was to get clean and sober. I've been sober now 22 years. People who knew me then hardly recognize me today. People who know me today wouldn't recognize me back then. It is drugs, including society's favorite drug, alcohol. We all think we live in reality when we all just live in our perception of reality. But no matter who you are, and the most enlightened people we all have this veil between us and reality. And the more enlightened you are, the thinner the veil is. Addiction, I mean, to me, you get really enlightened, maybe you see it exactly as it is, like in the Matrix. I don't know. If I get there, I'll let you know.
Okay.
But when any drug just thickens that veil, thickens it, and so you just thicken and thicken the veil. And when I was, right now I don't work one-on-one with people anymore, but I've just made an exception very recently. My nephew who has addiction, who's addicted. Well, I'm going to help my nephew, right? So I'm working with him, and I tell him, I'm working with him as a mentor because, the relationship, it can become an issue, and I don't really coach, but even though I do coach him, but it's mainly as a recovery mentor. And the thing I tell him, as you just said, I'm going to paraphrase, is that unless you get clean, you're just running on a treadmill. You're going to go nowhere, either slow or fast, but that's where you're going to get is nowhere.
Agreed. Absolutely agreed. Yeah. It's just being really truthful with yourself. And by the way, that long, clean and sober, that is impressive. It makes me think I was just recently on vacation visiting an old high school friend of mine who's been clean and sober for quite a while, and just hanging out with him and knowing he just says he feels just so much better, just day after day after day. And it's impressive. I'm the people that can do that for so long. So
I used to go to AA and NA, and I have a lot of great things to say about them, though I will caution people they have pitfalls and minefields, to look out for. But but one of the things is, it's a profound saying I heard from this one guy in this one AA meeting many years ago. He said, and it's like a cliche, or he certainly wasn't the originator of it. He says, alcohol gave me wings to fly, but took away the sky. And that was, I thought, was poignant. And,
Wow.
it's such, it's putting a Band-Aid on a gushing wound. It is such a myopic solution. Of course, telling an alcoholic, an addict, this is like almost go through, in one ear out the other. And I tell, like, my nephew, he's doing my program, some of it, and I explained to him. I told him, just said to him just the other day, I said, I'm not gonna say his name, you're gonna relapse. And he was kind of shocked to hear me say that. I said, you're gonna relapse. You got to understand, this is, in psychology, we call this a maladaptation. That's what addiction is, a maladaptation. And the problem, I already established, the problem is you, not you, the person. You're a good person, but what goes on between your ears is the problem. All right. All human problems, well, 99% of them are just between our ears. All right. But with addicts, with alcoholics, it's the thinking that allowed them to become that way. And absolutely it's the thinking that kept them that way, because there are all sorts of ways out. Like I mentioned, AA, NA, psychotherapists, people like you, whomever. There's so many different ways you can get out of this circle of this vicious circle. And man, you alluded to my own experience. I'm affected just thinking about it, because it was such a sentence. It's a vicious circle where at various points you're desperate for a corner where you can get a respite, you can get some relief, but there is no corner. It does not exist in that circle. And I literally, there were times I felt like smoke was coming out of my ears with my obsessive thoughts. And I was so desperate for something. I was suicidal for a point of my, I put a gun to my head. And it was, and there is a way out, and the way out is to continue with the metaphor of the circle, is to step out of the circle, but that's the only way out. Otherwise you're going to be in that circle till the day you die.
Yeah. I mean, the vicious circle is what it is. And, this friend of mine from high school got sober, was telling me about that. I know, especially with substances, because it is physically addictive as well. It's like you're not just fighting the mental battle, but then you got the physiological addiction as well. In my work with people who are wanting to create a change from whatever their own personal vicious cycle is, I don't specialize in addiction. I always refer out to experts on that. But it makes me think of this vicious cycle of someone who's trying to make a change in their life, right? And it's this repetition of a bad habit or something that brings you temporary relief, right? Generally from anxiety or from your feelings, right? That it's not okay to feel this way in the moment, and you think it's going to last forever. And we all know our feelings change, but in the moment it's suffering, right? So we want to use something to change that. That's kind of what we're told by society and our peer group and all this kind of stuff, right? So my work with athletes and just doing general psychotherapy, there is always that vicious cycle, right? So what is it that you're doing that is maladaptive, like you said, that brings you some sort of a relief or distraction, and that then you feel shame about it, right? And the shame makes you want to engage in relief again. And like you said, goes around and around. And the only way to get out of it is to step out of it, right? So like psychotherapy is one way to step out of it. Getting an AA or a different peer group is another way to step out of it. Taking up a sport, something that breaks the routine, is another way to step out of that circle, right? So there's a lot of ways. Going on a vacation, taking a trip, there's a lot of things you can do. So I like the way you described that, the vicious circle. It's so common for all of us.
Thank you. To back up on the psychotherapy and coaching discussion, I've often described coaching as moving towards the future, or with a focus on the future, and therapy more towards the past, so some reconciliation with it. Would you say that's accurate?
I said that's definitely very accurate. I also like to say that psychotherapy is about repair and healing, and coaching is about growth.
Yes.
And certainly there's growth if you do repair in psychotherapy, but that's the general thing is, yeah, future-oriented coaching, growth-oriented coaching, psychotherapy, repair work, focus on things that happened that were traumas, that were things in your life that got you off track. So yeah, repair and growth.
Great. And what better can a person ask for that, that wants to, wants help than to come to someone who is both like yourself. So they get, and when I was a coach, if someone had a diagnosis, I might work with them, but never on the diagnosis, because that's legal taboo. We'll consider that topic closed.
Sure.
Move on. But I want to also just compliment or come to a conclusion, if you will, on the addiction recovery. You talked about feelings. Again, with my nephew, or even when I was working with sponsees and AANA, I learned early on that the greatest skill that I had to master as a recovering addict was the ability to feel my feelings. Because boy, I hated those babies. I hated them, and drinking or using any other drug was just a way not to feel my feelings. My favorite feeling was numb. That was my favorite feeling. And so what I did, and I just went through the hard work of it, if you will, in my early recovery. But then I later learned about something from the Sedona Institute, which is out in Arizona, some personal development institute there. And I codified their method into a simple 3-part method to an exercise to feel your feelings. IWA, I call it. IWA: identify, willingness, acceptance. What am I feeling? Name the feeling. Not good or bad. That's the worst thing. What's the name of the feeling? Find it in your body if you can, and then you ask yourself the question: am I willing to feel this feeling? And if you're not, stay close to that coping, that AA, NA, or whatever your support group is, because you're going to need it, because you're liable to act out on that. And if you're willing, great, you can go on to the next one, which is the final one: acceptance. Is it okay to feel this feeling? And then if you're not, same thing as before, stay close to your support group. If not, just go ahead and feel it. And then 90% of the time, it'll change it to something else, because that's how we're designed. That's how it works. And it works for everybody, maybe. Even if the feeling is persistent, okay, they can be persistent, but they always change. And the more we feel them, the more they change. The more we suppress them, the more they stay, of course. even if we're numb at the time from imbibing or whatever.
Isn't that interesting though? It's like in the moment, it feels like the anxiety or the depression or whatever the feeling is, right, is going to last forever, right? And so the conundrum is like, well, if I fight it and I shove it aside, it's going to last longer. It's going to come back. And on the counterpoint, if I accept it, or you don't accept your situation, but you accept the feeling, right? Oh, how interesting. I'm feeling really nervous, or I'm feeling really bummed out about something right now. And if you're willing to fully just sit in that for a while, like it'll cycle through. It'll just say the energy will sort of just cycle itself through.
Absolutely.
And it may last for a while, maybe last for a couple of days or whatever. But like you're saying, if you just accept that, oh, this is what I'm feeling right now, then it kind of cycles through and dissipates. And then, naturally, you're going to move on to a different feeling. But if you fight it, and then what you're doing is you're not allowing it to complete the circle or the cycle.
Right, the cycle, yes.
Yeah, and especially if you use a substance, or if you're using any kind of, I'll call it like watching Netflix, I would call that almost a drug too, right? Or using food, or using just avoidance of a discussion with somebody. Right. All these things to not feel that difficult feeling makes it perpetuate. So interesting.
Yeah, and obsession, I found, is the non-drug way to not feel my feelings. So if you're obsessed on anything, outside of addiction, or perhaps addiction that we haven't called it that yet, that's just the non-drug way, and you do the same thing. Okay, great stuff. This has been a great conversation. We're going to continue. We're going to take a moment to hear from our sponsor and come right back with the fascinating Michael Ceely.
This episode of Self-Help Coaching is brought to you by Perficio. People start something, then something comes up, or they need a break or even a vacation, and they often never get back on track. Perficio is designed to allow all of this. Visit www.perficio.io. That's PERFICIO.io, where you can live your life as you learn and make progress toward your life-changing goals.
You're listening to the Self-Help Coaching Podcast with me, your host, Tony Petrozza. We're having a great discussion with Michael Ceely, psychotherapist and coach. And I'm going to get on to my next question now. How did you get into psychology and coaching? It's two-parter.
Yeah, so I think the seed was planted when I was 15 years old. My parents were getting divorced and they sent me to a therapist. And I was very reluctant at first, like, hey, I don't need any therapy. And fortunately, my therapist, his name was Gary, was fantastic. Just a real down-to-earth guy, no BS, just totally resonated with him. And I saw him for about a year. And at that time, I was just starting to get really good at bicycle racing. And he actually helped me toward the end of our therapy with bicycle racing and tied it into kind of the work that we did together. So again, we were talking about earlier, that repair work, right? In the psychotherapy, then you heal, then you're ready to move on to growth. Toward the end of our therapy, he was more on the growth end. And just actually, I thank him for my success in bike racing. I'm going to give him a lot of credit. And I'll tell you a quick little story.
At 15, from that intervention at 15.
Yep. So I saw him from age 15 to 16. And when I, fully accepted and acknowledged that my parents had split and was dealt with all that kind of stuff, I was starting to get good at racing. And I remember going to a therapy session with him, and I wanted to kind of brag. I was like, hey, I got like 8th place in this big race. And I was hoping that he was going to be really excited. And he just sort of mockingly claps his hands. He was a character. He used a lot of interventions that kind of threw you off, which can be very effective to kind of
love
shake.
that.
Yeah. And it was with a big heart too, right? He wasn't doing it for no reason. And so he's clapping his hands. He's like, bravo. And I was just like, what do you mean? I got a little mad at him. He goes, why didn't you win? Right? And I was like, well, I don't know. And he goes, you're so much better than 8th place. And he also said, you're playing it safe. And I was like, what? Whoa, what do you mean? It's like, you're playing it safe, right? Bam, exactly, right? And because I'd been getting like, 8th, 9th place, 4th, 5th, and I wasn't winning anything. And he knew I was ready for that type of push. I'd healed, I was ready for growth. He knew me well enough, and he pushed me. And he said, he leaned in, he was this old school dude. He goes, I never want you to play it safe in a bike race ever again. And like stern, right? I was like, whoa, dude. And it was the perfect intervention, again, because he really knew me. It was the right thing to say. And after that session, my results went up, skyrocketed.
He said the right thing to you.
That was it, and that planted the seed. I pursued bike racing pretty seriously until I was about 24, went to college late. And I think in the back of my mind, I just was really convinced how powerful and effective psychotherapy was, and that kind of coaching as well. But I wanted to be a bike racer, and I actually got into really into literature and languages, and I became a high school Spanish teacher for a while. Then I got into like linguistic technology. This is working in the San Francisco Bay Area.
I'm fascinated by language.
Oh, it's very interesting stuff.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
What were you doing out there as a linguist in San Francisco?
Yeah. So at the time I was working on some early speech recognition kind of stuff. I was also doing some stuff with working with cataloging large amounts of data into different categories. So it's like the categorization of topics, which is really interesting. But in the end, Tony, there was something missing. It was a lot of kind of busy work. I liked the concepts of it, but I was like, I need something else in my life. This is not doing it. Like the bike racing for me was passionate, just lit me up. It wasn't a job. I was like, I want to do something different. And then there was a psychologist that came into this company I was working for, an organizational psychologist who worked on team building. Okay. And to be honest, I thought he did a really bad job. Like it was very awkward. It kind of separated things, and we did all this testing. But what happened is sort of illuminated this group dynamic and really piqued my interest in psychology again. So much so that I started reading books and interviewing people about what it's like to be maybe a social worker, a psychologist, et cetera. I interviewed like 20 people, and with the intention of like going to grad school. So I quit my job and I went to grad school and got a degree in counseling psychology and never looked back. I love it. It just lights me up.
It's so great. It's so, I mean, it's like, it's a general human quality to want to help others. But when you're an expert in it, like you and me, and, you know, and you can really get into some deep stuff, persistent stuff, and get strides and even solutions and help people go from dysfunctional to functional. I got a smile from ear to ear. And I remember when I first began, and you know, like I said, I'm a practitioner of neuro-linguistic programming, which I've loved for a long time. And so I would use techniques that I was unfamiliar with, but I figured was applicable to this scenario. And we'll get into it. I did all my coaching on the phone, it was never in person. So that's obviously, you know, like online. But so you got to be very keen when you're listening, obviously. But I would use this technique, and it would be incredibly effective. And I would say, "Shit, this stuff really works," you know. And you know, it'd be like, "How's that problem?" And they'd be like, "What problem?" I'm like, "You know, the thing you were crying about for 10 minutes ago. Oh, that doesn't bother me anymore." I was like, "I love it," you know, and stuff like that. Oh, it's great. And you know, I have something I want to get into. You talked about, you know, all this being a psychologist and the effect of a psychologist on you and these impressions. And you'll tell me, since you're the professional psychotherapist, but you know, I used to bring up at the VA. I used to bring up a Narcotics Anonymous meeting to their psych ward, you know, regularly. I did it for years, and I was very friendly with the head psychologist there, and she knew me quite well because I did it for so long. And I had a breakup, you know, and I had a broken heart. She saw that I was really down, and she said, you know, you want to talk, you know? I said, okay, because I never had any therapy. So I saw her for just about 3 sessions, and she said something to me that I mentioned, saying the right thing to the right person. But I think what when you have a high trust for someone, that's the thing that really can let it in. You may have heard the same thing previously, but you didn't have that trust, and so you didn't let it in. I had a high trust for her. She said to me, I talked about the pain in my heart. I said, what about this pain in my heart? She said, Tony, you just got to make room for it. And I'll never forget it. It was so poignant and so true. And it helped me greatly. And I still remember it to this day. I just had to make room for it. I can't suppress it. You and I went over this already. If I feel it and I, you know, I know what happened, I really, you know, wanted the girl, and now she's gone. And, but that high level of trust, you know, it's critical for us, you know, in the change work profession, to have that with a client. But when you do, you can really help get to the part where the root is, you know, and make some significant changes. And what do you think about that, Michael?
Yeah, I mean, that is really the basis of psychotherapy, coaching, mentorship. Is that relationship you have with mentor, mentee, client, therapist, or whatever the roles are, is that trust, because we're social creatures. And to be that statement, you know, make room in your heart for the pain, like that's something where intuitively she said that, right? So that was like, so we call, in the clinical sense, an intervention during therapy, right? It's like, but what it was her tuning in to your heart, I think. I just being able to feel your pain and notice it, and you guys were connecting, obviously. And for her to say something like that, just shows that first of all, she got great skills, and second of all, the two of you had a good match. And I think that's really important in therapy. And in my practice, therapy and coaching, there are clients that will do amazing work together. Just it's like it's not even trying. It's just like it's a really good match. And sometimes the match is a little off. And if it's really off, I'll be honest and maybe refer them to a colleague or something. But that's it. It's just like that trust, that natural feeling. Things just go so much quicker that way.
I want to back up to something when you were talking about working with linguistics back in Frisco. Yeah, I know all us non-Californians call it Frisco.
I know. I was going to say.
In California is dread to hear it. And I lived in Los Angeles, so I'm like, how do I get to Sepulveda Boulevard? In LA, they're like, what? That's Sao Paulo.
Like, what are you, from New York or something? Right.
Yeah, exactly. Which, half of California originally was from New York, but that's long ago. So, my program, Proficio, which is going to transform self-help, it's quasi or pseudo AI, artificial intelligence, where I just use linguistics to leverage these users to be motivated to take action, and it acts as if it's AI, but it's not. And my partner, who's the tech director, I don't know, I hardly can put a computer on, and when we can, as we progress as we grow the company and the app, he wants to get into NLP, not like me, NLP, neuro linguistic programming, NLP, natural language processing, and get into this AI where actually people speaking will be processed by this artificial intelligence, and it will actually can make a decision that's programmed into it, which was awesome. I mean, I have a program, but it does exactly what I told it to do. But when you can have a program, make a decision using different options, with sovereignty, man, that's going to be awesome stuff. Using language, that's the key thing. That's fascinating stuff.
That is very fascinating, just the possibilities there. And having studied some linguistics and working in a job where I was a lot of like PhD linguistics folks, it honestly, like it's exciting what you're telling me. And then also, there's people talking about, psychotherapy with, AI, like there's actually people trying to build businesses like this. And I think that will never, ever happen effectively, in my opinion, just because of how complex human language is, and tone, and
yes.
The therapist knowing this client says one thing, then there's some body language or a tell, like, right. You're lying, right? Like it's so subtle and so complex. I don't think there's ever going to be any kind of programming or AI that's going to be as effective as the human ear and the human heart in interpreting language.
Well, you know what? I agree with you.
Yeah.
However, okay, let's say that humans are the best at it, or perhaps the only option. I have my app Proficio is an option, not as good as a human, but still supplying something that is desperately needed. Now, it is not psychotherapy. It is not life coaching. I've created a whole new kind of true coaching called self-help coaching. Now, that term has been around for a long time, but it's always been a misnomer, because if you work with somebody, by definition, it's not self-help anymore. That's personal development. You got to be by yourself for it to be self-help.
Right.
So I've created a program that's on a computer or a smartphone. So technically, you're still by yourself. It's a program that I made as an NLP practitioner, as a coach, designed to get a person to, well, it solves there's four pervasive problems with self-help. I love self-help, all of them, going back to Ben Franklin and even preceding him to Tony Robbins and all the countless self-help authors are out there. Problem is mostly potential. Oh yeah, I'm going to do that. I'm going to do this. Oh yeah, I'm going to achieve this. I tell you, if self-help worked, I would have been a millionaire 20 years ago. Why aren't I? Because we need a little bit more. Our pervasive patterns are pervasive. That's the problem. So we need a little bit more. And there's nothing as good as Michael Ceely, but there are things that approach the excellence, the value that you offer. And that's what I did with Proficio. So Michael Ceely is expensive relatively, especially if I'm going to have you on retainer 365. You're very expensive, but an app, much more affordable, much more pragmatic. And my app, and the problem is, people don't fail until they terminally quit. And NLP, we like to say that there is no failure, there's only feedback. And I agree. But when you quit terminally, that's it. You're out of the game. If you don't come back to it, maybe it's only retrospective. But that's it. You're in it until you quit. My app doesn't let a person quit. All right. And it has to be intuitive, because it can't be rah, and that crap won't work. It's got your person as an individual, and that's what my app does. It's customized to the individual, just like you're a real person, and you have a mind, and you're an expert. So, I have no doubt that, you taking a whole person, as opposed to, my Myers-Briggs profile for this guy is MBTI, and that's it. But I'm going to get into that profiling stuff, but that was superfluous at this point. But I love all of it. I love the real people like you and I love the promise of technology. I mean, indeed, this interview right now, but I mean, almost my entire audience listens to this podcast, but Michael and I are seeing each other through the app called Zoom, and it's wonderful. And he's down in Florida. I'm up here in Brooklyn, and we're having this wonderful interaction and connection. And that's just the scratching the surface of the technology offers us.
Yeah, I think definitely something like Proficio is super helpful. And speaking of self-help books, like I have one book on my shelf right now that I still haven't read all the way to the end, and it's a classic. It's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Oh, Covey.
Yeah. And that's amazing book. But there's, for some reason, maybe I'm resistant or something. There's the final last half of the chapter. Like I've never quite gotten through it. But with your app, there's this accountability thing, right? So that if, like you're saying, it won't let you quit, you have to complete it. That's what's missing, even from psychotherapy as well. Like I always give my clients homework between sessions, whether it's psychotherapy or coaching. Like always, almost always, so that there is this accountability. They're like, oh, if I didn't do it, I'm going to feel embarrassed, right, to tell Michael I didn't do it.
But that's a double-edged sword, Michael. Right.
Okay.
I think I contend that most people are not interested in self-help because, for a number of reasons, primarily fear of failure. Why should I do the self-help thing if I'm going to fail anyway? Okay, so they fear that. Even less people are interested in coaching, maybe not so much psychotherapy or therapy, but coaching, because they have that accountability, or that perceived accountability. All right, which is more important, which is more the important in terms of dealing with prospective clients.
Right.
And yes, that is there. But when I was coaching one-on-one, I would tell clients, listen, either you're going to do the work or you're not. I witness it, but I'm not going to force you to do anything. But the beauty of Proficio is it eliminates that perceived accountability, which is a great resistance people have, because they're not dealing with a human. They're not dealing with Tony Petrozza or Michael Ceely. They're dealing with an app on a phone. Now, I did bring in that accountability because it also brings in the group interaction space, because Proficio coaches a course. It's a coach that lives on the e-learning platform. Any self-help course can be on there. Tony Robbins, Personal Power, whatever. And my goal is to have the greatest collection of self-help in the world in our catalog. Anyway, but the fear of that accountability or that judgment, right, that a human might give, which they'd be the worst therapist or coach in the world if they judge their clients, of course. But nonetheless, the prospect fears that. So we eliminate that with Proficio, but we bring it in where it can be useful in the group interaction space, which are nothing but the person's fellow students going through the same course, either in the past, it's all there organized, present concurrently, or then maybe later in the future. So, not, if you don't mind, I think it's pretty much a genius app. When it comes out, which is imminently, and then once we upgrade it to bring on all these other courses, we'll find out. We'll find out if I'm the next Elon Musk, Tony Robbins. Tony Robbins will be coming to me. Great
That's
stuff.
exciting. Yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing more about it. There's so much great stuff that's happening with apps. Just if it helps people's lives, that's what's important.
Absolutely. And we're going to take a moment here from our sponsor, and then we're going to come back, and then we're going to talk about online coaching, which I just gave you an earful about my stuff, but now Michael's going to give you some of his opinion on online coaching. And this guy knows what he's talking about. We'll come right back with Michael Ceely right after this break.
This episode of Self-Help Coaching is brought to you by Perphysio. Poor finances are the leading cause of stress, divorce, and general troubles. Financial managers, coaches, and consultants are great, but responsibility rests with you. There are new answers. Visit www.perphysio.io. That's PERFICIO.io, where you can truly learn the foundational attitudes and methods of accruing wealth and staying wealthy.
You're listening to the Self-Help Coaching Podcast with me, your host, Tony Petrozza. We're having a really organic and interesting conversation with the fascinating Michael Ceely. And we're going to talk about online coaching, and which Michael has a lot to say about that. And Michael, including with your description about online coaching and how it's booming, I also want you to talk about some of the hyper niche skills in online coaching. So what about it?
Yeah, so of course we saw 2020 with everyone kind of being at home for a while, and Zoom exploding, and online psychotherapy being the only recourse for a lot of people, online coaching booming them as well. It's just, it's here to stay. There's a lot of advantages to it. I do want to talk about, there's some folks I see in my psychotherapy practice. It's all online, by the way, and my coaching is all online as well. And
when you say online, specifically, what do you mean?
Via video, just like Zoom.
Right.
I've had a couple clients who actually prefer the telephone sometimes, and I'm cool with that too.
I love coaching people naked. I'm just on the phone. No, I'm kidding.
The phone, no one knows, right?
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I didn't do that.
Yeah. So it's psychotherapy. There's been a couple clients where say they want to meet online, and I would say maybe not a good fit. Like, for example, doing like couples counseling, which I don't do at all, but couples counseling online via video as opposed to in person. I don't have enough experience, honestly, to say if the in person is better, but I tend to think that it is for couples. It may be working with a teenager. I think in person might be better personally. So I have some opinions about online services in this way being maybe
is
not
it because teenagers, you want to smack them around a little bit? Is that why?
Well, no, I don't go quite that old school. No. But
right, but you discern it. Some people say, listen, this is we get better results if you came in and you have your office.
Yeah. So certain folks, certain issues that maybe I think would be better in person, right? But generally speaking, I've found with my psychotherapy clients, like it's just as effective. It's a little different dynamic to it, but it's very, very effective. Same with coaching. The convenience factor is huge, right?
Huge.
And people who would maybe be resistant to traveling, like there's that barrier is just gone. Like, hey, let's meet on the internet, right? Easy, super easy. So it's helpful. It's also helpful for people in rural areas who may not be able to get to a coach in the city, and they live 2 hours outside of the city. So it's just really breaking down a lot of barriers for people. So I think it's great.
And the pandemic, it just hastened it. This was all inevitable. It just hastened it. That's all it did. And I say about Perphysio, people say, "Oh, this could be great for your business." I said, my business would be a huge success with or without the pandemic. It just hastened it. But yes, it's the convenience, the benefit, just as you elaborate on, it's just awesome for everyone involved. It's great stuff. And speaking of your coaching, you have 3 practices in 3 states. Why is that precisely, and how?
Well, let's see. So I grew up in Wisconsin, so I have a lot of family and friends still there. So I was actually considering moving there during like 2020. And so I got licensed there with the plan of maybe moving there and set up a really nice website and started coming to it. And I got the SEO dialed in, got everything going really strong for it. So it's a source service. And California, I went to school there, lived there for like 25 years. And so a license, that was my first place I got licensed. And then as we're talking before we're live here, I moved to Florida in 2020, just left California, and sad because, left a lot of friends behind, but it's different out here in Florida. So got licensed here in Florida. Those are the reasons. Those 3 states is where I spend the most time. And yeah.
So, and of course, each state is its own certifying body. So you have to, that's, I imagine that's the primary reason why you have 3 different practices. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah. So you have to be licensed in each state. Wisconsin has reciprocity with a number of states. And so that it was just simply a question of taking a couple of courses, whereas Florida said you have to take the national marriage and family therapy exam. So I had to take that exam. California has 2 separate exams. It's probably one of the hardest. New York's also very, very difficult exam. So it is state by state. But interesting.
But did you ever consider just cheating? That's what I did.
Well, yeah. I think maybe not.
A good old crib note.
Yeah, wouldn't want my license revoked. But
Yeah.
Interesting you mentioned that, Tony, because I got an email about a month ago from the Florida board where they're talking about we're modernizing online therapy. And so there's an actual discussion, which it looks like is probably going to happen, of states that have reciprocity with each other. So you can use your Florida license to maybe do online in Georgia or in Louisiana, things like that. So the neighboring states are starting to talk about this. So there might be a conglomeration of states for for online psychotherapy. Now with coaching, of course, you don't have to worry about that, right? Which is good and bad in that. So coaching is not really regulated, so it gives you a lot of freedom. You might have the perfect client match. I'm in Florida or someone in Washington State, perfect match, right? And if it was psychotherapy, I couldn't work with them, right? Where if I'm doing a coaching practice, it really opens up things, gives people a lot more options. At the same time, it's not regulated, right? So just like with any profession, there's like good plumbers, bad plumbers, good doctors, bad doctors, right? So with coaching, for the consumer, there's not really that state board that puts the hammer down for fear of taking your license away if you're doing kind of some shady stuff.
Michael, let me ask you.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, I'll ask. And I say this semi-seriously. What gives you more juice, the coaching or the psychotherapy? Is that a legit question? That's
a totally legit question. They're different types of juice. Like one's maybe guava and one's, one's orange. I don't know.
You went tit for tat on that one, huh?
Yeah, it's just there's something just really, really deeply satisfying about watching somebody heal and get insight, and just, it makes me even emotional talking about it. It's just beautiful. Yeah. And whereas the coaching is more kind of higher energy. Yes. Like let's go, you get kind of pumped up, you get your motivated. So they're different flavors. Yes. I would say I get the same excitement out of both of them. It's just a different vibe,
Yeah, to me, obviously I was just a coach, I was not a therapist, but some things are therapeutic. To me, the best was when a person went from what I call dysfunctional to functional. They had some. So they wanted something and they couldn't get it. There was something pervasively in the way, and I helped them get it. And that was just the greatest thing, where they just got out of I like to simplify it by saying coaches are just salesmen, and we just convince the client that they don't have the problem that they swore they had. And I'm being very simplistic here, but and I using my skills. But when they get convinced of that, finally, that's not a problem anymore. I don't do that anymore. I haven't done that in 2 months. I obviously my period of working with a client is short. It was just the greatest thing. It was just awesome. I love it. Oh, it's so rewarding on a human level. Great stuff.
Yeah, it really is. Well, watching that transformation, because you share the same emotions they have. That's the way we humans work. We mirror each other's emotions when we're in close proximity. So it's amplified by two people.
Great stuff.
Right?
Let's take our final break, and we'll come back with the unfortunate last segment with the great Michael Ceely.
This episode of Self-Help Coaching is brought to you by Perficio. Ever heard of accelerated learning techniques? What if you learned more deeply than ever before? What if you remembered what you learned far better than ever before? Visit www.perficio.io. That's perficio.io, where you can understand perhaps better than ever before.
You are listening to the Self-Help Coaching Podcast with me, your host, Tony Petrozza, and I got to say, I am thoroughly delighted with this conversation with Michael Ceely. This has been so sincerely, a very, very enjoyable conversation. It's such a delight for me. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Likewise, I'm enjoying it.
Okay, I'm going to change it up I have two final questions. I'm going to change it up with this one. Tell me about being a competitive cyclist, and what can those who are not cyclists get from it?
Yeah, that's a good one. So for me, I've been thinking about it as like an art form, kind of like the way that an artist has to do art, or like somebody who literally loves their profession has to do it. For me, when I was really racing competitively, this was a while back. I don't do it anymore competitively. I just do it for fun. But there was this thing of like almost I had to do it. Like it was this just thing that just felt so. I mean, maybe it was an addiction. I don't know, but it was. There's worse addictions than exercise, right? Yeah, it lit me up, and it made me feel alive. It made me feel in the zone. That feeling, you've heard this in sports psychology, in the zone, and you get in the zone like this in this conversation we've been in the
Certainly
zone, right? So for me, it was just that feeling of just being in the zone. I was talented. Like everything it ticked all the boxes. So I think, for folks who are maybe don't want to do something as crazy as competitive cycling or whatever, what is that thing in your life that lights you up? That where you do feel in the zone? It could be bowling, it could be bird watching, it could be anything, honestly. But it's personal for you, where you're doing it, you feel alive, you lose track of time, you're in the zone, you want to tell other people about it. Everyone, I think, has that. Or if they don't, they can discover it. There's plenty of cool stuff, to discover. So that's the takeaway from that with competitive cycling for me, is like finding that particular activity where you're in the zone. And to me, that's just one of the best parts about being human, is that when you're just clicking with your sport or your activity, or if you're in a band or whatever, like it's just like it's magic when you're flowing.
It's just a delight. It's just a delight. There are no complaints. This is the way things should be. It's fantastic. I love it. Great stuff. My final question: what's the difference between coaching athletes and non-athletes? At least from your perspective.
Yeah. So athletes, sports is tough, man. Like you gotta.
Boy, we have 0.01 seconds is the difference between being the winner and the runner-up.
Yeah, I think that athletes can be very, very hard on themselves.
Yeah, no doubt.
To the point where they're suffering in silence, and the outside world thinks that they got it all together, because they're so damn good at being tough on themselves, of really wanting to improve. And I think that's a great skill to have, but it's like kerosene. You got to be really careful with it, so that if non-athletes aren't dealing with that inner discipline as much, that kind of kerosene. But the athletes, if they're not careful, they can be so self-critical, it can lead to depression, anxiety, all kinds of stuff. So that's the main difference I see, is that self-criticism, which in a way is good because you're able to improve. You're able to improve your results, but you have to be the master of it. It can't be the master of you, you know?
So is it fair to say that they hold such a high standard for themselves that when they don't think that they are keeping it, maintaining it, or reaching it, they let themselves have it?
Yeah, it's like we were talking about earlier. If they have a result or that they're not happy with, if they lose a race or if the team loses, they think that feeling is going to last forever. And they project in the future, like, oh, what if I never win again, right? And it's just this kind of trip they got going on in their head. They can really just start beating themselves up psychologically. And so when I work with athletes, I have them focus on growth, almost like a chart. If you think about the ups and downs, as long as it's going up, as long as their sort of mission in their sport is personal growth, athletic growth over the long term, then they're able to see the big picture, and they're able to see like a loss as part of the process of growth. It's not to rationalize losing, it's just being real. It's like, hey, you can focus on being miserable about your performance, or you could just take lessons, move on, and be kind to yourself.
Absolutely. Sometimes I just, when I get a little hard on myself, I can just say, I'm in a process. You can call it life. All right.
Yeah.
It began at birth. It'll end at death. And it's one giant process, and it's filled with infinite sub processes. So I can just scope out until I feel good.
That's it, man. Perspective.
That's great.
Dude.
Michael, I gotta say this totally sincerely. This has been one of the most enjoyable conversations I've had on this podcast. It's really, besides having a great rapport with you, I think that our conversation was so organic and filled with such insight from both of us and value for the listener. It was truly delightful. Thank you so much for coming on, and I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Tony. I feel the same. I think definitely clicking here. Or I've given a lot of good value to your listeners. I think it started off, I think we hit it off right when we both liked the Ramones before.
That was in the pre-interview discussion, folks. We talked about the Ramones. How can someone find you online? Tell us about your websites.
Yeah, so easiest way to do it is just Google my name. It's pretty unique. So my first name is Michael, last name is Ceely. That's spelled Ceely, and all my stuff will come up. My social media, you see my coaching and my psychotherapy. Yeah.
And we'll set up a profile on the website. We'll have all your websites and all your social media on there too. Michael, thanks so much. I really appreciate it. It's been a wonderful conversation. And remember, everyone, we're all responsible for ourselves, and we could all use a little help. With that, thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next podcast.
Thank you for tuning in to the Self-Help Coaching Podcast, where insights, attitudes, and methods for success get illuminated. Learn what leaders and change workers have done and are doing now to create magnificent futures. Remember to visit our website at self-helpcoaching.com and enjoy even more great episodes like this one. Again, while you're here, subscribe to us via your favorite network. We look forward to seeing you next time on the Self-Help Coaching Podcast.